Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. So people are still joining, which is fantastic. Thank you so much, I said, for being here today. My name is Lorna, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. And Marissa, you can see in the corner as well. So Marissa's our fab marketing manager who has helped put this together. Just to kind of bit of housekeeping, you should have both a Q&A and a chat box. Please use the chat box for things that are live. Maybe you missed something, maybe you want to clarify something. Use it for that. I'll keep an eye on it. The Q&A, anything in there we'll get to towards the end. I'll try to answer anything that you've got in there. I think, obviously these are really strange, uncertain times. So if I can't answer it in the moment, then certainly I'll try to get to it later. And Marissa and I will also take it away to have to think about any follow-ups, any future projects, and any insights we might be able to gather later on. It's a really, really moving feast at the moment. Things are changing all the time. So it's just worth saying that, this went in the diary kind of maybe 6 weeks, 2 months ago. And it's so strange. It was a completely different world then. I imagine many of you were out of the country at international events, maybe not in China at that point, but certainly other places. And I think it must be so strange for you guys. I know you're so used to spending a lot of time out of the country, and now not just spending time at home, but also in your house and unable to get out. So yeah, I really, really feel for you all. I think it must be such a tough time. And hopefully we'll give you something useful today. A lot of you were fantastic and shared some really, really interesting questions and ideas. And, a lot of those you can try to start to answer, but because everything is so uncertain at the moment, hopefully I can give you some ideas and some guidance, but potentially not clear answers. And that's a real challenge at the moment, isn't it? But let's begin properly. My name is Lorna. I'm the Education Account Director here at the Student Room. I've worked here the last couple of years, and prior to that, I worked in a university. So I've worked in higher education for about 5 years. And before that, I was, in the private sector, working in agencies and doing a lot of integrated work. At the moment, I look after a team that looks after many of you. So hopefully you'll know a lot of my team and love working with them. And really my responsibility is just making sure that you have what you need and thinking about working together strategically. So I've done lots of research for this webinar, and hopefully you'll find it really, really interesting and useful. And anything you don't feel is answered or anything that's not clear, please pop it in the chat or pop it in the Q&A. So just for those that have continued to join, great to have you here. And just to confirm, so there's a Q&A box and there's also a chat box. If you use the chat box just for things that are live in the moment, and then any bigger questions, pop those in the Q&A and we'll try to get those towards the end. Now bring the chat up and make sure that's perfect. Okie dokie. So in terms of the agenda, today we'll be focusing on the international recruitment in numbers. So we'll have a little look back about where we were last year. Obviously things have changed an awful lot, but it's worth seeing where we were, where we've come from, and hopefully where we can get to again. And then also, I'll just talk about the international audience on the Student Room. So I think potentially you didn't know that there was a big audience for international on the Student Room, and that's a bit of a misnomer and a bit of a misunderstanding. So I can talk about our audiences, and then also we'll just talk really briefly about COVID. Obviously that's the elephant in the room, and I've tried really hard to balance this out, thinking about things as BAU, but there's no getting away from it at the moment. And so hopefully I can talk to you a little about the kind of opportunities and risks associated with that, as well as kind of what international students want to know. So as part of that, we'll be talking about really the trends in behaviour, what they're talking about, what they're viewing, and some really interesting word clouds as well that showcase what they've been posting about over the last couple of weeks, and then summarising about putting this into action. So lots of things you can do in the short term and in the long term, and many, many things that will be useful for you both now in this absolute madness, but also down the line when you want to just get back to normal. Okie dokie. So this is really where we were. This is kind of student recruitment in numbers as it was, as it continues to be, hopefully. And I imagine many of you all know this already, but we've had obviously massive increases in international recruitment over the last 7-8 years, but even last year, so 5.9% increase in total enrolled students. for 2019. It's huge, massive, massive numbers, and really positive. I think it's clearly that's trajectory that we're going down, and obviously that will be more difficult this year, but I would hope it would bounce back massively. Now, in terms of where a lot of that growth is coming from, of course, when the visa changed last year, and when the news came out about that, there were key markets that were super excited about this, understandably, because it's what they're motivated by employability. So the visa changing, enabling students to stay with us for 2 years, and hope you bring their knowledge, expertise, and fantastic energy to the UK market. So we had a huge increase from India and also Nigeria. So that's versus 2017 and 18. Those of you that have worked in the industry for a long time will know that India used to be an enormous market and really declined once there were caps put in place, and obviously restrictions with the visa. So it's really wonderful to have that back. I really do think students from India and South Asia just keep communities really alive and bring something a little bit different, which is fantastic. I think the other thing to note here, and again, this will not be a surprise to anybody, but just the enormous number of students that study business and management and administration. 30% of the entire market are studying something along those lines. And then also alongside that, 32% of students enrolled in the UK are from mainland China. So what we have there is huge reliance both on China and business and management. And actually in the UK, we have an incredible art scene, an incredible social sciences scene, amazing education scene when it comes to academia. So it's almost a shame that there's such enormous reliance on business. Obviously it's really important for economies, but there's so much wealth and interest in those other places that hopefully we can diversify away from business and management down the line. And then just one final point in terms of where the market was, is actually just to have a look at those numbers in relation to postgrad and undergrad. So I always think the international market is purely PG, and of course, like, the effort has to go in every year for postgrad because they're just here for a year, and there's very small numbers doing PhDs and postgrad research. But certainly PGT, the numbers are massive every year, and 159,000. That's not every year, there was growth there, but having huge numbers coming to us every single year is fantastic, and the effort has to go in there. But of course, when undergraduate students choose us, they stay for 3 or more years, and so there's enormous value there. And I think it's really interesting to see that there's actually total more undergraduate enrolled students, and of course a lot of those also will stay on for their masters as well. So being able to get them to choose us at undergrad level makes a massive difference down the line. Cool. So I think there's obviously a bit of a risk here, just generally. So at postgrad level nationally, 45% of students at a national level are overseas students. And there are going to be some really big universities that may feel pinched for that at the moment. So certainly, your really big Russell Group universities, UCL, Liverpool, Manchester, but also Coventry, University of Arts London, do really well with international recruitment. There's going to be a big gap there. I'm concerned about that. So yeah, we'll talk about that shortly. But also just to note on kind of other subject areas. So whilst the biggest area is obviously business and administration and management, other really big areas are engineering, social studies, and actually creative art and design, which is fantastic. And you can see that the University of the Arts London having a really big international cohort is fantastic, but it just shows the UK's strength in this area. It's really exciting. Other universities do really well. RCA, yeah, so lots of kind of very lots of fine art, lots of creative work, and fashion we seem to do really well in, which is fantastic. And that strength doesn't go away. We're still fantastic for these subjects, and of course everyone will be feeling the pinch. In terms of market universities, so that's where we were, and this is just a bit more getting to think about the nuances of each market. And of course, again, when you're in market, you can really see that. But I think whilst we just talked about 30% of students all enrolled and studying business, what's really interesting is, so this work by UUK, the International Graduate Outcomes, what's really interesting is 18% of respondents actually working in education. Part of me does wonder whether actually the study slightly skews towards those that really engage in education in a continued way and really value kind of talking to someone like UUK, but nevertheless, it's a really big number. So 18% of international graduates continue to be employed in education. So obviously some of those might be PhD students who continue to work in academia, understandably. But actually, I think it's really interesting to see, like, the students that are choosing to do masters or choosing to really invest in their education continue to love it, continue to want to stay in education and supporting that sector, which is awesome. Unsurprisingly, you know, not only do we have a kind of a really strong reliance on China, mainland China, as well as business, unsurprisingly then those graduates are, a lot of them are spending all of their time and their career in finance and budgetary sectors. I think that's another way of saying banking, which is again no surprise there. And I think this is where some really lovely nuances come out, because actually in contrast, 23% of Indian respondents were self-employed. So whilst in China there's maybe a culture of working in large businesses and doing a lot when it comes to money, which is no surprise there, it's really interesting to see that actually for the Indian respondents, the focus is on being entrepreneurial, starting your own business. I think, you know, actually India as a whole has a really, really big reliance on self-employment, and actually like I think it's something like 80% of the population in India report themselves as self-employed, because so much of the country is based on agriculture, and many of the smaller farmers, of course, they're self-employed. They work their land. So I think, you know, that culture is really deeply embedded, and I think, you know, it's yeah, I think it's really interesting to see those differences, and just making sure that we're talking about and talking to these students based on what we know is their interest. And certainly I think this is an opportunity to go back to your alumni and your current international students and understand a bit more about what they really wanted to come to the UK for, to come to your university for, and then you can understand a little more about their bigger motivations, and then also the nuances between those markets, because there is a big difference. I think what's interesting as well also is that across all respondents to this UK piece of research, so 14% of all respondents reported running their own business just 2 years after graduation, and there was a steady rise after that as well. And of course, I think, you know, that's probably similar to trends across the UK as well. But people that travel across the world and travel around the world for their education are self-starters. They are really motivated, and potentially they have some really good family money that will help back them when it comes to business. But I think any opportunity you can give these students to start their own business, to be entrepreneurial, to get involved in something that starts something of their own, will be really exciting for those students. So where you have a great career service, or where you have a really good entrepreneur service at your university, absolutely talk about that. Put it in their line, put it in their kind of their line of fire, and absolutely go after it. I do think many international students, particularly in the UK, just have a fantastic ability to make a lot out of not very much, which is amazing. So obviously, kind of that's looking back about where we were, and just thinking about that. Then just really consider where your focus should be moving forwards, and that's kind of thinking both about subject areas of focus, but also where your focus should be in terms of undergrad and postgrad. I certainly think early engagement is going to be really important at the moment. And of course, postgrad is going to continue to be a really, really important factor. But with undergrad, of course, you know, in terms of revenue and propping up the university financially, 3 to 4 years of student tuition fees will make a massive difference. And of course, the universities in the UK are better than anywhere else in the world, I think, you know. So my massive patriotism for our universities coming out there. But they really will have a fantastic time and get an awful lot out of studying in the UK. So if we can get students to think about us earlier on, all the better. And then also, of course, understanding market nuances. So again, do your research about what the motivations are for each different market, and of course where the funding comes from. So because that makes a massive difference as well. So, you know, it's really clear. You know, Nigeria, there's a big focus on engineering. India, there's a big focus on computer science as well as business, and of course in China, big focus on business. And we know that by subject, but actually what's underpinning that? Is that because it's what that's what the government needs and the market needs because they're funded by the government, or is it actually a more cultural focus where these students really want to start their own businesses or support their families? So there's loads of different ways that students are motivated, and the more you understand that, the better. And I think, yeah, for anyone else that's been on these webinars before, my first advice is always just to do a deep dive in your data and really understand your audience as it stands already. Okay, so you know, why are we well qualified to talk about international students? I think it's really important just to let you know a little bit more about our audience on the student room. So we tend to have a total of about 10 million users a month across the site, generally between 8 and 10 million per month, depending on the time of the year. Now, in terms of unique users from international markets, actually that's 3 to 4 million a month. So anywhere between 30 and 40% of our audience every single month is international and outside the UK. And that's huge. There's very few, particularly education websites that have an audience of that scale, which is amazing. And that transpires into an average of about 5.2 million page views a month, which is enormous. And I think, again, there's really interesting differences in the ways that these markets engage with the student room and where they spend their time. So you can see down the right-hand side there, top markets on the student room. So I think, one big trend about kind of students that spend time on the student room is that these markets tend to be have a very high level of English language. So of course, USA, first language, India, one of the main national languages, Singapore, UEA, Malaysia, Canada, Australia, Pakistan, Thailand, Nigeria, we're talking about all markets that have a really strong preference for searching in English and speaking English. For all these countries, English is one of the national languages. And I think that's also something to focus on. I'll talk later about some of the interesting search terms that international students come through on. But for the student room, SEO and organic search is a way that our audience grows naturally. So all these students are searching in English. Now, you'll see here, there's obviously, China is not one of the top markets. And probably we think that is because Baidu has such a strong market share in China, and Google is not preferred and not used, and also because there's so much service that is for Mandarin and for native languages in China, but there's no need to search in English. And so whilst we do have a substantial Chinese audience, it really isn't at the scale we're looking at when it comes to the USA or even Nigeria. However, the China audience overall views the most page views per session, which is really interesting. So although those students are slightly fewer than maybe other markets, actually they're really, really engaged, really motivated, which is fantastic. And then another interesting nuance as well. So the UAE, they post the most. So I actually always thought it was Malaysia. I see Malaysian students on Student Room all the time, but potentially UAE students just not identifying themselves as being from the UAE. So yeah, UAE students, they are posting 38 posts per 1,000 page views. That's absolutely massive. I just want to touch as well on kind of other markets that have a lot of page views per session. So in addition to China, Hong Kong, Cyprus, Greece, UAE comes back again there, South Korea, but also Bulgaria. I think Bulgaria, it really that market may really suffer now that we've left the EU, which is really unfortunate. I think Bulgarian students again have made a big base for the EU students in the UK because they've obviously been able to take advantage of the loans. So that'll be a shame. But yeah, so lots and lots of markets are spending a lot of time on the site and looking at a lot of page views per session. And then other high posting markets. So obviously UAE there is the highest, but lots of other markets in the Middle East really post a lot, ask a lot of questions, really engaged, really motivated. So after the UAE, actually Oman and Saudi Arabia are the next two top posting markets, which is really interesting. That's followed by Greece, Bangladesh, Egypt, Jordan, and then more kind of Middle East, so Iran again, and then Sri Lanka, China, Qatar. So loads of markets really, really engaged, posting an awful lot and getting an awful lot of the conversation on the student room. So at this point, actually, I will talk more about the behaviour of these students, but I just wanted to set the scene a little bit about where the data that I'm going to talk about comes from, because we just have a massive audience. They're super engaged and they talk a lot on the student room. So this just gives you a sense of the scale of the audience on the student room, and also that kind of informs everything else that we're going to talk about. Okay, and just a reminder, if you can't hear me, if anything's not going quite right, just please pop that in the chat and we'll come to you later. Cool. Oh, there's been one question. So can you send the slides just afterwards? So yeah, this is being recorded, and so yeah, you will get the slides and the recording afterwards for sure. Okay. So yeah, the elephant in the room. Yeah, it's COVID, isn't it? Absolutely crazy. Bizarre time. So just looking at this kind of briefly, of course students are talking about this and they care about it and they're worried about it. And so what we have here is just kind of a visual representation of the conversation. So all of this data is from all posts and threads that included the word coronavirus or COVID before the 12th of March. So that's when this data was pulled. I've got some updated data down the line, which just shows kind of the 16th up to the 28th as well. So something that's kind of a bit more focused. But here, I think what's really what's interesting is it's probably, this is really, really similar to the conversations that we're having. And I think what's really interesting about this is that COVID and coronavirus is it provides a level playing field in which none of us know anything. We're all worried. We're all really scared. And it's providing enormous uncertainty for everybody. So you can kind of see there's a kind of two sides of the conversation here. So a lot of it's talking about what's happening. So it's talking about China, the outbreak, Wuhan, flu, symptoms, trying to understand really what's going on. And then there's another side of it, which is about those feelings. So you've got worried, you've got worse, people wanting to stay tested. So people talking about the elderly, the economy. So what you've got there is people really trying to understand what's going on, but also them sharing their feelings about it. And you can see, yeah, there's also just a reference of exams there. Now, obviously, this is from before the 12th of March. When I show you the data from kind of the more recent period, you can see that goes way up, and that's a massive concern. But really, I think trying to understand what's going on and, you know, how people are feeling around their panic and their uncertainty is the biggie. And so for me, like the big takeaway for us, for them, it's all the same. It's vast uncertainty. So I've just popped this this post in here. So again, it says 6 days ago, but it was a little while. This is when I pulled it. It's the person here is just so uncertain. They don't know what's happening in their exams. They don't know what's happening with their qualifications. They also really think, you know, that Pearson, there was a lot, before the exams were cancelled, there was a lot of conversation that was unfortunately very critical of anyone that was being unclear and not communicating about what their plans were. So Pearson was one of the last international exam boards that cancelled their exams, and the conversations went through the roof, closer and closer and closer to the point at which they were going to cancel, because everyone else had cancelled and they hadn't. And it was that uncertainty. You know, if Pearson had said, we're definitely going ahead, crack on, they wouldn't have liked it, but they'd have known what's going on. And it's the uncertainty that's driving a lot of the concern, and also a lot of the risk and a lot of the potential damage to brands. Yeah, I think it's fantastic now that Pearson have cancelled things, and a lot of support internationally around changing, cancelling, moving exams. I actually don't know if any of you have seen this. I don't think anyone from Cambridge is on, actually, but Cambridge's engineering department, I'm not sure what other departments, but Cambridge's engineering department have also said they're cancelling exams completely. So that's a really interesting thing. And I think, yeah, again, those Cambridge students are finding an awful lot of reassurance just knowing what's going on. Okay, so when it comes to coronavirus and everything that's happening at the moment, there is lots of obvious risks, but there are also opportunities. And I think that it's worth talking about those opportunities as well. We'll talk about risks, but I also think that all risk can become an opportunity. I imagine a lot of you are really concerned that all of the work you've done in the last 18 months with current students, current applicants, may be undone. But let's look to the future, and let's talk about the best ways to address this. Okay, so leaning into your strengths. International teams, international recruitment teams, you are the best at making experiences from afar, because you've always had to do it. You've always had to do it. You know, you can't always be in India, in China, in Malaysia, in Thailand, in Colombia. You can't always be there. So you've had to provide really fantastic customer service and really, really interesting experiences from afar to bring the campus to life, to bring the experience of being a student to life. So this is the time for you to shine, really. You know how to do this. So a combination of sharing your expertise with colleagues in domestic teams, but also just really lean into that and ramp it up massively. Provide more online tools. If you've already done some videos, do more videos. If you're already doing some events, do more events. You know, like you actually have not more time necessarily, but you're not out of the country, you're spending less time traveling. Potentially now is the time to put more events on, and really double down on early engagement. So, you know, all decision making when it comes to education takes a really long time. It's a huge personal investment, and of course for international students it's also a really enormous financial investment. So if you can really double down on that early engagement, then this will really future-proof you, not only for this year but also for future years. Now a couple of bits that may be out of your remit or out of control, but certainly worth talking about, are a combination of online and distance learning as an alternative, and also delayed starts for international students. Now I think at this point it's worth just reaching out to your current applicants to find out what would be best for them, because I think this then, I'll talk a bit more about communication strategy, but communicating with your audience, communicating with your prospects to say, we actually also don't know what's going on. We're trying our best to work out the best solution for you, but please let us know about what you're thinking and how you're feeling, will make a massive difference. So if you're consulting your students to say, or your prospects to say, what's going to work best for you? Would you be happy to start online distance learning and then join us in January? Or would you just prefer a delayed start? If you can do these things, if you can provide mitigated, delayed, or alternative forms of education, that will absolutely save a lot of time. I do think thinking about undergrad in particular, the risk is then potentially over recruiting when it comes to this year during results and clearing, potentially. And then when students are able to come back to campus, the risk is obviously just not having the space for all these students. So I think it's got to be a balanced decision, but certainly reaching out to those students and asking what is going to be viable for them will be really really powerful. I think you value their opinion. These are bright, intelligent, motivated people, and of course they'll really like being asked by you about this. So yeah, those are a couple of things in terms of this year that can make a difference. And potentially also you could learn more about other ways to focus and motivate students down the line when it comes to things like online and distance learning. And then finally, this is a very cynical view. There is likely to be some kind of recession off the back of what's going on at the moment. And this may be really short-lived, and as soon as coronavirus is out of the way, that we can bounce right back. It may take a little bit longer, but certainly when it comes to post-grad tour in particular, recessions are kind of good news, in that if people can't find jobs, then they'll turn to education. And so depending on the depth of a recession, those students whose parents have always been able to pay for them probably will still be able to pay. And also at this in these stages of recession, governments may continue to still invest in scholarships and in transnational education so that those students can bring back a lot of skills, experience and expertise to their home countries. So very cynical, please don't judge me for putting this in here, but it is an opportunity, and I think keeping an eye on that and seeing what's going on in different markets about the way they're responding to bits and how their economies are doing is a really salient but cynical point. So there are lots of opportunities, and I do think that international markets, international teams, more than anybody else, are best prepared for this. You know how to do communicating from afar, but I think this is also where you may need to get more information and more support from the wider university to provide those provisions. But certainly starting out with finding out what's going on with your students and what's a viable option for them when it comes to joining you or not joining you this September or January is really good. So risks. Now I've talked about recession as an opportunity, but of course a recession is a risk as well. As a recession's a risk, but also just not being able to travel. We don't know how long this is going to go on. So I think this is where those opportunities around online learning and delayed starts are important. I think focusing on online learning and finding out what's going to be useful for them will make a difference. Now in terms of a recession, obviously there's lots of parents that are very wealthy that will be able to continue to provide for their children to come to the UK or travel the world for their education. But also depending on where that money comes from and whether it's tied up, it may not be possible. And I also mentioned whether the possibility that certainly in a recession, governments may double down on their scholarships. The alternative may also be possible. So I think there's risks and opportunities with all these things, and some markets will invest in education for their students, and some won't. So I think staying really, really close to any government contacts you have, and all of your agents to understand what's going on in those markets and where those spending might happen is really important to stay close to. The other big risk really is poor communication. And of course, great communication is an opportunity, but it's also kind of BAU, it's what expected of these students. But I think it's just really worth noting at this point, when it comes to communication, you are not expected to know everything or have all the answers. I mentioned this about Pearson. I think their silence was really unhelpful for students, unfortunately, when it came to exams. And actually, it's fantastic they've come out now and been really clear. But just having consistent communication with your students about what you do and don't know and what you're doing to support them and how you're thinking about them will make a big difference. Silence can be really damaging at this point. Certainly think about a lot, you know, think about myself as a consumer. If I'm going to be charged for something at the moment that I can't go to, you know, like gyms, it was great to know that my gym was going to be pausing my thingy, what's it called, subscription membership, and I wouldn't have to pay for it for 3 months. That was really good to know early on. If I was like, if it was silent and I knew nothing and was continuing to be charged, I probably wouldn't feel great about my gym at that point. So being really communicative and sharing what you have and being human in this moment is going to be really, really powerful and will set you apart. And of course, as part of that, being warm and supportive. So absolutely, there's going to be some markets that aren't affected by coronavirus at all at the moment. Many will be. And there's a risk, and it's just, again, really tough. There's a risk that many of our applicants may be losing their loved ones, and finding the entire situation so scary and so painful. So if you can be supportive and human and provide regular communication, that will go down really, really well. It's exactly, you know, I think putting yourself in the position of a consumer, of course, like maybe you aren't planning to, you know, go to China for your master's or do an MBA at Harvard or something, but put yourself in the position of a consumer and how you're going to be feeling about brands that are or aren't communicating with you at the moment, and work out what's going to be, what you really like about it. Which comms do you like, which comms don't you like, and where is there a gap for you? Learn from that and then make sure you've got a really clear strategy. So in terms of key takeaways around kind of thinking about coronavirus, where the risks and opportunities are. So firstly, absolutely lean into your strengths. You are good at this, double down on it. Make sure early engagement is happening sooner rather than later. Also, things like future-proofing online learning. Again, this may not be in your wheelhouse, but there is somebody at your university that knows about this. Now, find out what's going on from them. See what might be useful for you to find out from your applicants. Work together. This is, you know, I can't believe you know, my team have been even more collaborative than normal, which has been absolutely amazing. I think, you know, anyone that's not using Microsoft Teams, I recommend it. It's really good. But if you can future-proof online learning, that will make a massive difference for you and future cohorts as well. And then finally, kind of something that's going to be coming again and again and again. Having a really robust and clear communication strategy with prospects and applicants will make a huge difference as well. And like I said, you don't need to know the answers. You just need to be communicating. You need to be human and connect with them on a real level. Okay, so going back to international students on the student room, I'm going to talk a bit about what they want to know. And I think where we can start with that is what's being talked about currently. So this is a word cloud for all international users in the most important places for you, which is uni courses and study help on the student room. So this is a word cloud just of their conversations. So this is, you know, there's no coronavirus in here. This is much more general. This includes lots of information that's and lots of conversations that's happened long before COVID came along. And I kind of really love this. It's really clear that they are really interested in lots of different levels of study. So you can see MPhil, DPhil, Bachelor, but also scholarships. Scholarship and scholarships come up quite a few times in there. But also I think there's some lovely nuances in here when it comes to thinking about other markets. So firstly, I kind of love that there's y'all. You see that there? Y'all. Some just little small differences in the ways that international students talk amongst themselves and to their peers and on the student room is really interesting. So you've got this here, temperature. So I remember early on working in higher education, particularly for international, I remember running a similar webinar. And one of the questions that we got a lot of the time, particularly from South Asian and African markets, was what should I pack? And a lot of the advice, again, I was reflecting on one fantastic Ghanaian student who was like, you need layers. You have never heard of layers, but you need layers. So, you know, lots of students thinking about what it's really like, what the temperature's like here, what the climate's like, and what they need to wear as part of that. But you can also see here, there's I kind of talked about MPhil, DPhil, Masters, etc. But there's also lots of IGCSE and IGCSEs conversations as well as A-levels. So students in the student room, this is where you can do some early engagement because these students are spending time on the site really early on. Study help is a huge part of what we do. It's a massive way that we really support students become their best selves. And so the opportunity is to engage early. The opportunity is to engage before they've even thought about what kind of where they're going to university or what market we can influence in that way, which is really exciting. Now that's the last year. Now the parameters for the next word cloud are exactly the same, except we change the dates to just the 16th of March to the 28th of March. So again, same parts of the site, and you can see that it's completely different. Lots of, I mean, you know, this time of year in particular, there's lots of conversations around so acceptance, rejections. So you can see there's lots of conversation there about universities and what's going on for them as well. Still conversation about scholarships. But what's really interesting is the biggest words are cancelled exams. Now, thinking about your comm strategy and communications, being human, we're all taking each day as it comes at the moment, aren't we? We kind of have to, because life is bizarre and we're still kind of settling into that. And it's the same for these students. Now, the next thing on the horizon for them is their exams. The thing they've been doing their entire lives, particularly for undergrad students, is education. They don't know any different, and it's all been leading up to these exams now. And now they're cancelled. I can't, it's so, I really feel that this is going to be very traumatic for these young people, where a lot of students, particularly those that are motivated enough to want to travel for their education, they will be working so hard in their revisions, so hard in all their exams, so hard in extracurricular things, and suddenly it's out the window. And a lot of their identity has gone out the window as well. Now, that doesn't mean to say that it's going to put them at a disadvantage when it comes to coming to university, but getting into university is only one part of the exam process for them and the qualification process. A lot of their social groups are going to be made up by the different classes they're in as part of their qualifications, whether they're doing different subjects together, what level they are, you know, are they good at maths or bad at maths? Are they doing arts programs or not doing arts programs? Are they doing sports programs or not? So their identity, their social life has all been built around these things, and then it's gone. So you can really see here just how much it's impacting them. You can see, yeah, like affected is here as well. Lots and lots of uncertainty, but also things like safe in here. But of course, everything is just taken over by coronavirus. There's lots of, yeah, you can see lots of words like virus, closed, unfair, rejection. I don't know, it really breaks my heart. I feel, but for all students, I really feel for them at the moment, but particularly those school leavers. There's just a lot they're never going to get. You don't get to go back and do it again, do you? But yeah, so I think very, very emotional, very anxious. Actually, on this point, I'll send this around to you guys afterwards as well. I'll speak to Marissa about getting this in, but I don't know if you've seen that Habas have done a really interesting piece of research on media consumption. But some of the early questions they asked in their survey was about how those respondents were feeling about lockdown and about coronavirus. And the most anxious group were 18 to 24 by a long way. And obviously you can see that here as well. Just some more kind of examples of what they're talking about. So yeah, again, these were just before Pearson and Excel cancelled their exams, but they were just so worried. You can see, oh God, we have struggled so much for A2. Please see our hard work and give us the grades we deserve. Oh, you can really feel the emotion, the anxiety, the fed upness, so seriously fed up. They don't know what's going on, and the one thing they thought they had control over, they no longer do. And it's in the hands of their teachers. And if they've got great relationship with teachers, then fantastic. And if they don't, then they are so worried, so worried. So again, like I said, this is where that human touch, those consistent communications, creating a really powerful, authentic, emotional experience through your comms with your prospects and applicants will go a really long way, And certainly getting online to talk to these students now, reassure them, let them know what you're doing, how you're feeling. And also I think there is something strangely reassuring about knowing that across the world we're all in the same boat. It's scary, but it's all there's something, yeah, settling to know, okay, well, I'm locked inside as well. So are you, 3,000 miles away. There's something very human and connecting about that, ironically. In terms of kind of behaviour and where students are spending time, so kind of moving away from coronavirus and thinking more generally, and again, where you can spend your time on the student room or elsewhere. So on the student room, international audiences, this is where we're seeing most page views. So medicine is a massive area for the student room just generally, and there are so many search terms that we do incredibly well on at this level, but also law, engineering, computer science, dentistry. I think what's really interesting here is actually business is not in the mix. So if you do want to diversify away from business and kind of reduce your reliance on that, the opportunities are here in this list. So law, engineering, computer science, and also quite a lot of interesting health courses like medicine, like dentistry, but also economics and biology and things like that as well. So there's lots of opportunity to diversify your marketing for these subject areas on the student room. And yeah, this is a ranked in order, and the data is Feb to Feb, so it is 12 months data. I mentioned also already that we do very well through Google and through search. And so I just wanted again to show you some of the top search terms for international users. And again, this is over the last 12 months. So in the Universities and Uni Courses forums as a whole, there is a huge focus on head boy and head girl. Now, that does not surprise me. Again, international students, regardless of what they're applying for or where they're applying in the UK, they are really motivated and they want to be the best. And they want to be head boy and they want to be head girl. So lots of speeches and queries here about how to write head girl speech, inspirational head girl speech. They want to get voted in. They want to basically prove that they're amazing so that they can then apply to your amazing university and have something great to talk about. In terms of uni and unicourse forums, so I think what's really interesting here is lots of dull search terms like subject to approval, what is reading week, graduated with honours. What this suggests to me is that international students don't actually know what these things mean. They're trying to look for what subject to approval means. They don't know what reading week is. It's a really anglicised British term. Other places don't have reading week. They have like spring break. In the UK, reading week is quite a unique thing in terms of a term. So just making sure that your communication is really clear, very simple language, and explains things that are nuanced for the UK is really powerful as well. But of course, very similar to other to the UK market, how to start a personal statement, how to end a personal statement conclusion. They really want to know how to sell themselves. They want to know how to express what's great about them, which I think is also mirrored then in those study health and vision forums around how to write head girl speech, head boy speech. Again, you can see here, so references to U grades, IB past papers is a really big international baccalaureate audience on the student room. We've had a forum dedicated to that for a long time. And also they think about Erasmus already, which is fantastic. So these are some of the top generalist search terms when it comes to study health and vision. But you can see this table here. Loads of things that I really don't understand. I have no idea what CU plus HNO3 equals CU brackets NO3 close brackets 2 plus NO plus H2O. I think maybe chemistry. I don't know, but again, you can see like these students are looking for information about very specific subject areas that I really don't understand. And on the whole, it is mostly chemistry, mathematics, physics, but you can also see here alliteration effect. So again, obviously students are doing English literature, English language, and learning more about that, which is really interesting. So yeah, there's a lot. I think study health and revision is a really underused part of the site for universities in the UK, but also internationally. What do students do before they start applying to university? They are studying, they are revising, they are getting themselves in the best place for their application. So this is where to do that early engagement. This is where you can double down on making sure that your students are choosing you, thinking about you, and also importantly considering the UK for their qualifications. Just because they're doing IB does not mean they're considering the UK yet, but they will. Okay, in terms of more market behaviours, so again, this is all international user posting in the last couple of weeks around posting and page views. So I asked our data team just to pull like the most viewed and most posted parts of the site, and there's a lot of crossover. So again, I've split out uni and uni courses and study help because they are slightly different parts of the site. So unsurprisingly, postgrad applications is one of the biggest parts of the site for international, because so many students are coming to us, coming to the UK for their postgrad, for their masters. So just in 2 weeks, almost 1,000 posts and almost 100,000 page views for postgrad, which is enormous. But again, I think, you know, some of those course areas that we mentioned earlier, law and medicine, are cropping up again. I think what's really interesting is whilst those subject areas like medicine were among kind of like the most viewed over the course of the year, actually law is coming out on top at the moment, which is really interesting. I'm not entirely sure why that might be. And I think it's just, you know, you can see loads and loads of posting, which is very interesting. Lots of applications clearing in UCAS as well. So you can see it's what's interesting, it's about a third of the size of the postgrad applications forum. And what's interesting is that each undergrad cohort in the UK is about a third of the size of a single postgrad cohort. So I think what's interesting is really tracking against the trends for enrolments as well. Slightly more page views per session though. When we look at study help, unsurprisingly again, yeah, A-levels, but also we created a part of the site that's dedicated to coronavirus. 2.5 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago today, because the conversations were cropping up so much everywhere. They were just everywhere, and it felt really important to consolidate those for ourselves and also for the users to get the information they were after. And so you can see here, in terms of, you know, posts per page views, so many posts versus the page views. And again, a lot of this was focused on IAL, IGCSEs, and understanding what was happening next. But even now that we've had the answers, posting is still absolutely through the roof. I'm not sure if any of you saw the insights email that went out last week, but overall across the site over the last few weeks, we've had a 13% increase year on year for unique users, but across the site also a 28% increase in posting. So whilst we're seeing more students on the site than ever before, also they need to engage, they need to communicate, they need to have conversations on the site, and certainly in that coronavirus forum, we're seeing a lot going on there as well. But also maths, GCSEs, international qualifications, lots and lots of posting, lots of engagement, and yeah, lots of people working out what the answers are and what they need to do next. I think it's on particularly for the study help part of the site, interesting where some forums have a lot more posting versus the page views. I have just pointed out coronavirus as being kind of one of those areas. But you know, A-levels has a lot more posting per page views versus mathematics, and then in contrast, international qualifications has a lot more posting per page view. So page views are lower, but the audience is super engaged. Really interesting. Okay, so in terms of the behaviour of the audience on the student room, the kind of big key takeaways really are there's a large interest on the student room for relatively underrepresented courses. So yeah, business is not represented highly when it comes to posting and page views, and this is the opportunity for you to diversify your cohort as much as possible. I think also one big takeaway, particularly when it comes to kind of the words you're using, just be really, really clear, speaking really kind of clear, plain English. And of course, I've already talked about making sure that your communication strategy is really clear, but it all falls into that stuff. If you don't have a plain English specialist, it's certainly worth maybe getting consultants in to have a look and do a bit of an audit of your comms at the moment, just to make sure that it's as clear as possible for the full spectrum of the students that you're talking to. Okay, we've got 10 minutes to go. I'm going to whiz through these key takeaways, and then we can take your questions if you've got any. So just having a look. There's only one question asked, but we have got time. So any questions you have, yeah, please put them in the Q&A or into the chat, and we'll speak to you in a second. So just to summarise your key takeaways. So really consider where your focus should be moving forwards. And we've talked about postgrad, but certainly could your focus be more heavily weighted to early engagement with undergrad students and pre-undergrad, just to get that in at the ground floor. And even if those students are choosing not to come to you later, then certainly they'll be kind of on the way. So also, obviously, understand the market nuances. Absolutely, you should be looking at your own data, surveying your own students, and learning more about why these students are choosing you, and also understanding the differences between the markets so that you can really respond to their needs specifically. Also, absolutely lean into your strengths. It's so important. Like, you guys are the best at this, 100%. So lean into it, do more, do better, and get really creative. You really can't lose in this moment. So I think, you know, everyone knows that everyone's learning. Everyone knows that this is completely unique for everybody. So weirdly, this is a time that you can innovate as much as possible. And if you get a little bit wrong, actually it's okay, because the audience will know that you're trying and will really appreciate that. Of course, future-proofing online learning, we've talked about that, and talking to students about what's going to work for them. And I think, you know, number 5, this falls into everything else that we've talked about, having a really robust and clear communication strategy. This is a time of uncertainty for every single person, and we have to be led by lots of other things. But if you can be clear about what you do know and what you don't know, be really supportive and really human, it will make a huge, huge difference. Of course, you know, I think you should talk to students in the student room as well. You know, if your university has a partner pack and an official rep, just make sure that the international team has access to that login, so you can reach out, find international students on the site. I think what's really interesting, so for those of you that don't know, the University Partner Pack, you can have keyword alerts. You can let us know what those keywords that you want to follow are. So, you know, for faculties, it's specific course areas, but international students tend to identify themselves as international or their nationality. So you might want to have a think about those as your keyword alerts, and then you'll get like a daily or a weekly email letting you know what conversations, what students are saying. You can go in and help them out. Okay. Cool, so we've had a couple of questions, thank you so much. So question 1 more, what are the perceptions of the UK at this time? What do international students think of the way we are dealing with COVID-19? In honesty, students are not thinking that far ahead. They are still so focused on their exams that we haven't seen massive conversation from international students about what they think about the UK. There were really early conversations about cancelled interviews and cancelled auditions, and actually while students were upset about it, they really understood and appreciated that had made an impact for them, and that they knew that it was the right thing for their safety and for the university's safety. So whilst the student I saw that talked about this, actually there was the first one that posted about it, they travelled from maybe Sri Lanka. They travelled such a long way for their interview, and then obviously they couldn't do it. So actually that perception, the way that was thought about, was really positive. So again, I think this comes back to, in terms of perceptions of the UK, actually, like, our clarity in the way we're dealing with things will make a massive difference to the way that they perceive us. Question here about what sort of law courses are being looked for. That's a really good question. Let me write that down. I don't know. Go back to what law courses. Okie dokie. Okay, so will it influence international students' propensity to study here in the future? We don't have data on this at the moment. My gut feeling is probably there will be a slight slowdown and it will pick back up, and it may be that we have a couple, 2 to 3 challenging years. But again, thinking about that uncertainty, it's so difficult to know. We don't know what the market's going to do. We don't know what the economy is going to do. We don't know when coronavirus stuff will stop. You know, of course, we're social distancing, we're in lockdown at the moment, and it is making a difference. Of course it is, but with any new thing, we need more information, we need more data. My gut feel is that for the next 2 or 3 years, it will be a challenge for international students to want to study further afield, but I don't think it will impact in the long term. And this is where I think, you know, thinking about like alternative ways to deliver education, the UK education system is still perceived as the best, if not one of the best, if not the best in the world. So I think, you know, reinforcing the really fantastic education academia we have here, it makes a massive difference. I think it's some of the really interesting research I've seen lots coming out of Newcastle and Hertfordshire and UCL and Imperial. Those are really fantastic research that's coming out for coronavirus. That's a really good place to start thinking about, like, how is your university impacting and supporting things at the moment that will impact the world? Okay, should we try and nurture the student journey as we would normally? For instance, inject some normality to the students rather than firing out about comms about COVID-19. Yes. So when I'm talking about being human and having a really clear and robust comms strategy, that isn't necessarily to let them know about COVID. It is to connect them with current students. It is to connect them with academics. It is to let them know about really interesting research that's happening at the moment. It is to show them how beautiful the campus is in springtime, if you can get anyone onto campus or use some previous imagery. These are the human elements. It doesn't have to be about COVID-19. It doesn't have to be about coronavirus. It doesn't have to be about the absolute madness now. I mean, personally, I'm trying to avoid the news at all costs at the moment. Anything that keeps it human, keeps it feel grounded, keeps it feel connected. I don't think it's necessarily about nurturing the students normally, but it necessarily, because I do think the cycle is going to be slightly different, but it really is about, yes, injecting normality, keeping it human, keeping it connected, and keeping it personal. What's your feeling on how regularly we should be communicating with offer holders at this time? Probably via email. I imagine for most of you have a regular email going out once a month, probably to prospects. That's a marketing email. I imagine then also you can have international teams that are in the recruitment teams are probably having conversations one-to-one. So I'd probably be increasing it slightly. And again, the comms don't necessarily have to be very like robust. You don't have to have like 4 or 5 different calls to action in the email. It might just be, like I said, lovely photos of campus. And I think, again, what's interesting, whilst we've seen a really big growth in audience and posting on the student room, I have heard from a couple of agencies that other channels are seeing reduced engagement, which is really interesting. So, if you can make your, maybe doing Facebook live streams or webinars or things like that part of your social strategy as well, that would be really, really, positive. I also read, and again, let me send, I've got a few bits I've been reading recently. I'll talk to Marissa about getting these links out to you guys as well if you haven't seen them. But EIE have also done an interesting research piece with current university staff. So rather than students, talking to staff about what they're doing. And what's really strange to me is that so few of them actually even talked about social media. All students are on social media all the time, and I think potentially this, again, thinking about really rich, diverse digital experiences. That's where maybe you can kind of start integrating those bits, and maybe giving them an opportunity once a week or once every 2 weeks just to come and talk to you live. So yeah, I think email is probably still a really good channel. We've seen massive increases in engagement with email recently, I guess because they're not schooling more, they're not at university, they can engage with email more. But yeah, so has there been any questions on health surcharge or how they're treated in the UK? That's a really interesting question. I actually haven't seen anything about that, but let me write that down and see if I can find out more information. Also, I'm really conscious of time. It's now 11 o'clock. There's one more question I'm going to try and get to. Okay. Any idea which territories seem to be the most anxious and need an extra hug? I think given that we've seen massive posting from the Middle East and UAE, I guess maybe they're just behaviour. I'm going to find out. Again, I'll write that question down and try to come back to you. Which I do. China must need a massive hug at the moment, though.
From what we're seeing,
keeping an eye on the news. I think we need a hug. Cat. That's right there. Thank you so much for your questions. I think we're going to end there.
There is one more, which is actually in the chat, which is about market research.
Oh, let me come to that. Sorry.
And certainly anecdotally, what I'm seeing is that China was at least initially the first to be very concerned about how it would affect their studying in the UK.
So yeah, the question in the sorry, I couldn't hear you there, Marissa, so I'm sorry if I'm just repeating what you said, but the question in the chat is Is TSL planning on doing any market research with international students, for instance, surveys, or what content they'd appreciate? Marissa's probably best placed to answer this. I would hope the answer is yes, but yeah, what can you let us know?
There are plans. So currently we're doing a big piece of market research on the domestic audience, but international would hopefully be our next stop. Having said that though, because that's a different branch of TSR, I don't want to speak on Julie's behalf in terms of timelines and what that's going to look like, but we will be keeping you up to date with everything that's happening. There is one underway and that will be out with you shortly. The other thing I would ask is that we've sent out today at 10 o'clock, we sent out an email for you guys to fill in a survey where you can give us a bit more information about specifically what you need, what kind of insight. We can't obviously promise that we're going to be able to get everything over to you straight away or even ever, but we're certainly going to do a good job of trying. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you as well for attending. So yeah, so let us know, especially by completing the survey, that will help us as well.
Amazing. Just a couple more ideas about how to get involved in the student room there. So if you haven't signed up for one already, or if you don't have a colleague coming along, the community team are also doing some coping with COVID sessions. The next one is tomorrow at 2 o'clock, which is actually just about communicating on the student room in particular. So if you would like some extra help with that, if you would like to use your university partner pack or find out more about the benefits of it, then certainly go on tomorrow. And if you need anything else, just get in touch with myself. Just keep in touch with me and Marissa. Let us know what you need, any more questions, any thoughts, and connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can hopefully help you out down the line. Thank you so much for coming, guys. I know it's a really mad time, so I'm so grateful that you've given us an hour of your time. Have a lovely afternoon. The sun is shining here. I really hope it's shining where you are as well. Speak soon.
Bye.